The morning sun streamed through Prosperity National Bank's towering windows, illuminating Dr. Sarah Jenkins' perfectly pressed silk blouse as she checked her watch again. 9:47 a.m. Her appointment had been scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. As one of the city's leading neurosurgeons, Sarah was accustomed to keeping precise time. Lives depended on it. "I'm sorry for the delay," Dr. Jenkins. Richard Thompson called from behind his desk, not bothering to look up from his computer screen. "We're experiencing an unusually high volume this morning." His dismissive tone was one Sarah knew all too well, having navigated similar situations throughout her 15-year career in medicine. She watched as he ushered another client who had arrived well after her into his office with an enthusiastic handshake and warm smile. The contrast was stark for them. Richard was all charm and efficiency. For her, there were only excuses and delays. Sarah's fingers brushed against the folder in her briefcase containing documentation for the hospital's new pediatric neurosurgery wing, a $50 million project she had spearheaded after pioneering a revolutionary treatment for childhood brain tumors. The irony wasn't lost on her. Outside these bank walls, she was Dr. Sarah Jenkins, whose name would soon grace that wing. Here, she was just another customer being made to wait. "Mr. Thompson," she called out as he emerged from his office again. "I have surgeries scheduled this afternoon. How much longer should I expect to wait?" He glanced at her briefly, that same practiced smile playing across his face. "Not too much longer now. Perhaps you'd like to reschedule." Sarah straightened in her chair. No, she thought, she wouldn't be rescheduling. Not today. The digital clock on the wall ticked to 10:15 a.m. as another customer walked past Sarah and straight into Richard's office. She focused on keeping her breathing steady, the way she did during lengthy surgeries, but this was a different kind of endurance test. The waiting area had filled and emptied twice now. Each time, she noticed the pattern white customers whisked away for service, while customers of color were asked to wait or given reasons to return another day. A young Hispanic couple had left frustrated after being told their loan officer was unexpectedly out sick, despite Sarah having seen him enter through the employee entrance just minutes before. As she watched, memories surfaced like old wounds. The patient who'd demanded a different surgeon, claiming he wanted someone more experienced, code she'd learned to translate over the years. The real estate agent who'd steered her away from certain neighborhoods despite her 7-figure salary, insisting they wouldn't be a good fit. The country club membership committee that had lost her application. Twice. "More coffee?" Dr. Jenkins, a young teller named Maria, asked quietly, genuine concern in her eyes. Sarah smiled and declined politely. She'd learned early in her career that showing frustration would only reinforce their prejudices. But one hint of anger, and she'd become the angry black woman stereotype they could dismiss. Richard emerged again, escorting out a man in golf attire. "Wonderful to help you today, Mr. Peterson. I'll personally expedite that wire transfer." His voice carried across the lobby, carefully crafted to be heard. Sarah noted how he'd processed a same-day wire transfer for this walk-in customer while she sat waiting for a pre-scheduled appointment. The memories continued their parade. Her first day as chief of neurosurgery, when a nurse had asked her to empty the trash, assuming she was part of the cleaning staff, despite her white coat and credentials. The time security had been called because she was suspiciously loitering in the doctor's parking lot of her own hospital. Each incident had been met with the same excuses she was hearing now: miscommunications, unusual circumstances, simple misunderstandings. Dr. Jenkins, Richard called out, and for a moment hope lifted her spirits. But he continued, "We're experiencing some technical difficulties with our system. I know your time is valuable. Perhaps we could reschedule for next week." Sarah glanced at her watch again. 10:45 a.m. She'd watched him process at least 7 other customers during her wait. "Mr. Thompson," she replied, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used in the operating room, "I specifically scheduled this appointment to accommodate my surgery schedule. Is there a particular reason others are being served ahead of me?" Richard's smile tightened. "Not at all, Dr. Jenkins. As I explained, we're having an unusually busy morning, and with the technical issues." "I understand," she interrupted smoothly. "Then I'll continue to wait." She pulled out her phone, making a few quick notes. Each customer served, their approximate wait time, the quality of service they received. If Richard noticed her documentation, his only response was to disappear back into his office with another client. A security guard had begun hovering nearby, adjusting his position to keep her in his line of sight. Sarah recognized this dance too, the subtle intimidation, the implied threat. She sat straighter, her presence a quiet defiance. In the operating room, she held lives in her hands, commanding teams through procedures that required perfect precision. Here, she was being treated as if she might steal the complimentary coffee cups. The clock hit 11 a.m., 2 hours of waiting, of watching others receive immediate service, of carefully maintained composure. But Sarah Jenkins hadn't become one of the country's leading neurosurgeons by giving up when things got difficult. She settled deeper into her chair, a silent testament to persistence. Let them wait her out, she'd learned patience in the face of prejudice long ago. As Sarah reviewed patient files on her tablet, each surgical success story reminded her of the journey that brought her here. Growing up in Oakland's working-class neighborhoods, she'd watched her mother work double shifts as a nurse, instilling in Sarah both a passion for medicine and an understanding that she'd have to work twice as hard to get half as far. By 16, she was taking advanced placement classes while working part-time at a local clinic. 4 years of pre-med at Howard University, followed by medical school at Johns Hopkins, where she graduated top of her class. Her groundbreaking research in pediatric neurosurgery had saved hundreds of children's lives. Yet here she sat, being treated as if she'd wandered in off the street. Behind his desk, Richard Thompson straightened his tie, a habit from his 25 years in banking. He prided himself on reading people, on knowing which customers deserved the premium experience. In his mind, he wasn't prejudiced, he was practical. Experience had taught him which clients were worth his time. The fact that this Dr. Jenkins had an appointment meant little. Anyone could claim impressive credentials. Maria, the young teller, watched the situation with growing discomfort. She'd recognized Dr. Jenkins immediately from the newspaper coverage of her revolutionary surgical technique. Last month, Dr. Jenkins had saved Maria's nephew, removing a tumor other surgeons had deemed inoperable. The contrast between the brilliant surgeon Maria knew and the woman being made to wait gnawed at her conscience. James, the loan officer, shifted uneasily at his desk. He'd been at Prosperity National for 5 years and had seen this pattern before. But questioning Richard's methods meant risking his own position. He had a family to support, a mortgage to pay. Still, watching Dr. Jenkins maintain her dignity while facing such obvious discrimination made his silence feel heavier by the minute. Sarah felt their gazes, the mix of sympathy and discomfort from some employees, the suspicious glances from security, Richard's dismissive glances whenever he passed. She'd learned to wear these moments like armor, each slight strengthening her resolve rather than weakening it. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "Your excellence is your protest." In the operating room, Sarah's hands never trembled, her focus never wavered. She'd earned her position through brilliance and determination, becoming the youngest department head in her hospital's history. Now, she carefully controlled her breathing, channeling the same steady patience she used during 12-hour surgeries. Her presence here was about more than just completing paperwork, it was about occupying space in a world that often tried to deny her place in it. Dr. Jenkins Maria offered, her small act of defiance against the morning's injustice. Sarah accepted with a gentle smile, recognizing the solidarity in the gesture. Even here, in this moment of indignity, she was planting seeds of change through her quiet persistence. The late morning rush brought a steady stream of customers into Prosperity National's lobby. Sarah observed each interaction with clinical precision, noting the stark differences in treatment. A white businessman in a rumpled suit was immediately escorted to Richard's office, despite lacking an appointment. A black small business owner was told the business loan officer was in meetings all day. An elderly Asian couple waited 40 minutes before being informed they needed additional documentation for a simple account inquiry. Sarah's phone buzzed the hospital. Dr. Matthews needed to consult about tomorrow's complicated spinal surgery. She stepped outside briefly to take the call, acutely aware of the security guard tracking her movement. Through the glass doors, she watched Richard usher another walk-in client into his office. "Yes, I can review the scans now," she said, pulling up the images on her tablet. Even while managing this situation, she remained Dr. Jenkins, the surgeon who never lost focus. She annotated several areas of concern on the scan, her expertise undiminished by the morning's indignities. Returning inside, she found her seat had been removed during her brief absence. The message was clear, an attempt to make her leave. Sarah calmly retrieved another chair, placing it precisely where the previous one had been. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. "Dr. Jenkins," Richard emerged from his office again. "I've been trying to accommodate you, but with these technical issues persisting," he gestured vaguely at his computer. "Perhaps we should reschedule for next week. I could make you our first appointment of the day." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Thompson, I have 3 surgeries scheduled this afternoon, beginning at 2 p.m. I cleared my morning specifically for this appointment, which was confirmed twice by your staff. I'll continue to wait." Richard's facade cracked slightly, frustration seeping through. He hadn't expected this level of persistence. Most people would have left by now, accepting defeat in the face of his bureaucratic obstacles. But Sarah Jenkins had spent her entire career overcoming barriers placed in her path. The tension in the lobby grew palpable. Other customers had begun to notice the pattern, whispered conversations carrying undertones of discomfort and recognition. Maria had stopped offering coffee to anyone, her silent protest against the unfolding discrimination. James purposefully slowed his processing of other customers, creating small delays that might force Richard to finally attend to Dr. Jenkins. Sarah's phone buzzed again. The hospital administrator, reminding her about the afternoon's procedures. She answered with calm authority, "Yes, I'll be there. Everything is proceeding as scheduled." Her voice carried across the lobby, a reminder that outside these walls, she commanded respect in operating rooms where lives hung in the balance. Richard's next client, an older white woman, paused before entering his office. "Wasn't she here when I came in earlier?" she asked loudly, gesturing at Sarah. Richard quickly ushered her inside, but the moment lingered, rippling through the lobby like a stone dropped in still water. 2 hours and 17 minutes had passed. Sarah's documentation of the morning's events filled several notes on her phone. Each incident, each dismissal, each excuse carefully recorded. Her mother had taught her long ago: document everything, leave a paper trail, create evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. The atmosphere in the bank had shifted from mere discomfort to something more potent. Even the security guard had retreated to a far corner, no longer able to maintain the pretense of casual observation. Sarah sat unchanged, her posture perfect, her expression composed. She had performed surgeries that lasted over 15 hours. This display of prejudice, however blatant, would not outlast her determination. The bank's glass doors swung open at 11:30 a.m., admitting a group of impeccably dressed individuals. Charles Montgomery, CEO of Prosperity National Bank, led the procession, engaged in animated conversation with his fellow board members. Their quarterly meeting was scheduled for noon, but they'd arrived early to handle preliminary matters. Richard Thompson burst from his office, straightening his tie. "Mr. Montgomery, welcome, sir. We've prepared the conference room." "Just a moment," Richard Charles interrupted, his face brightening as he spotted Sarah. "Dr. Jenkins, I didn't expect you until the board meeting. How wonderful to see you already taking initiative with branch visits." The color drained from Richard's face as Charles strode across the lobby, hand extended warmly towards Sarah. She rose gracefully, accepting the handshake with professional warmth. "Charles, I actually had a 9 a.m. appointment to complete my board member documentation," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent lobby. "I've been waiting since then." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Charles's expression shifted from welcome to concern, then to barely concealed anger as understanding dawned. The other board members had gathered around, creating an impromptu circle of power that notably excluded Richard. 2.5 hours, Charles asked, his tone dangerous. "Richard, would you care to explain why our newest board member, selected specifically for her exceptional leadership and community impact, has been waiting since 9 this morning?" Richard's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The carefully constructed walls of his prejudices crumbled as reality crashed in. He'd spent the morning dismissing one of the most influential new additions to the bank's leadership. There were technical issues, he stammered, but Sarah smoothly interjected. "Actually, Mr. Montgomery, I believe this presents an excellent opportunity. I've spent the last 2.5 hours observing this branch's operations, albeit unintentionally. I've documented several patterns of service that I believe warrant immediate attention." She opened her tablet, displaying the meticulous notes she'd taken. For instance, I observed 17 customers who arrived after my scheduled appointment being served ahead of me. Of those 17, 15 were white. The 2 customers of color were redirected to other branches or asked to return another day, but the board members exchanged glances. Victoria Chen, head of compliance, was already taking notes. James, the loan officer, had emerged from his desk, ready to corroborate Sarah's observations. Furthermore, Sarah continued, her voice maintaining its professional calm, I witnessed 3 instances of customers of color being told certain services were unavailable, only to have those same services offered to white customers minutes later. Maria, would you be willing to confirm these observations? Maria stepped forward, chin held high. Yes, Dr. Jenkins. I've observed similar patterns for months, but didn't know how to report them. Richard had begun to sweat visibly, his earlier confidence evaporated. The security guard who'd spent the morning watching Sarah had mysteriously disappeared from the lobby. Dr. Jenkins, Charles said, his voice heavy with authority, I believe we should move this discussion to the conference room. Richard, you'll join us. And please bring all customer service logs for the past 3 months. As they moved toward the conference room, Sarah paused beside Richard's desk. Mr. Thompson, I believe you'll find the technical issues have resolved themselves. Shall we process my board member documentation now? The power shift was seismic. Richard's hands trembled as he gathered his files, now facing the consequences of his prejudices in the most dramatic way possible. The woman he'd dismissed as unworthy of his time would now be instrumental in deciding his professional future. Looking around the lobby, Sarah caught glimpses of small smiles from the staff, Maria's obvious relief, James's quiet nod of respect. The other customers watched the procession with varying degrees of understanding, some finally recognizing the morning's subtle discrimination for what it was. As she took her seat in the conference room, Sarah thought of every person who'd ever been made to wait, been dismissed, been deemed unworthy of respect. Today's revelation would ripple far beyond this single branch, creating waves of change throughout the entire institution. The changes at Prosperity National Bank began immediately following that fateful board meeting. Sarah's documented observations became the foundation for a comprehensive overhaul of the bank's practices. Within days, external auditors were reviewing service patterns across all branches, while HR specialists developed new training protocols. Richard Thompson found himself at a crossroads. Rather than terminating him, Sarah had made an unexpected recommendation: let him be part of the solution. She recognized that true change required converting those who had perpetuated the old system. Your experience in banking is valuable, Mr. Thompson, she told him during a private meeting. But banking isn't just about numbers, it's about serving communities. All communities. The transformation began with mandatory bias training, but went far deeper. Sarah instituted a new customer service tracking system that monitored wait times, loan approval rates, and service quality across demographic groups. Each branch now displayed clear service standards and customer rights information in multiple languages. Maria was promoted to customer service manager, her sensitivity to community needs becoming a model for other employees. James headed a new initiative to expand small business lending in underserved neighborhoods, finally able to act on his long-held desire to create positive change. Richard's journey proved surprisingly profound. Working directly with Sarah on community outreach programs, he began to see his own biases clearly for the first time. The turning point came during a financial literacy workshop in a predominantly black neighborhood. I used to see threats where I should have seen opportunity, he admitted during a staff meeting. I missed chances to help people build wealth, achieve dreams, create legacies, all because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. The bank's culture shifted gradually but definitively. New hiring practices brought in diverse talent at all levels. Customer feedback systems were overhauled to catch discrimination early. Branch layouts were redesigned to be more welcoming and accessible. 3 months after Sarah's appointment, Prosperity National's customer satisfaction scores had risen dramatically. The bank's community lending programs were being lauded as models for the industry. Other financial institutions began sending representatives to study their transformation. Sarah established regular listening sessions where community members could voice concerns directly to bank leadership. These sessions often revealed blind spots in policy and led to innovative solutions. When an elderly Vietnamese couple shared their struggle with complex banking forms, the bank developed simplified documents in multiple languages. Richard, once the face of institutional bias, became an unexpected advocate for change. He spoke at banking conferences about his transformation, sharing how confronting his prejudices had made him not just a better banker, but a better person. "I used to pride myself on knowing which customers deserved premium service," he would say. "Now I understand that everyone deserves respect, dignity, and access to financial opportunities." The security guards who had once followed customers of color were retrained as service ambassadors, helping people navigate the banking system rather than intimidating them. The lobby where Sarah had waited now featured comfortable seating, free financial resources, and artwork from local artists of diverse backgrounds. 1 year after her appointment, Sarah stood before the board presenting the results of their transformation. Customer diversity had increased by 40%. Loan approval rates showed no significant disparities across racial or ethnic lines. Employee satisfaction had reached record highs. But numbers only tell part of the story, she concluded. The real measure of our success is in the lives we're touching, the dreams we're helping to build, and the communities we're strengthening. The branch where she had once been made to wait became Prosperity National's flagship location for community banking innovation. The incident that began with discrimination had catalyzed a movement toward genuine equality in financial services. Maria now trained other customer service managers, teaching them to recognize and challenge bias. Dr. Jenkins showed us that change doesn't always come from confrontation, she would say. Sometimes it comes from simply standing your ground with dignity and forcing others to confront their own prejudices. Richard's office, once a symbol of exclusion, became a space where all customers received equal respect. He kept a small photo on his desk showing him at a community banking awards ceremony, standing proudly beside Sarah as she accepted recognition for Prosperity National's transformation. The story of that morning and the changes it sparked became part of new employee orientation. It served as a powerful reminder that institutional change begins with individual awareness, and that true prosperity comes only when it's accessible to all. 5 years after that transformative morning, Prosperity National Bank had become a case study in institutional change. The bank's assets had grown by 60%, driven by expansion into previously underserved communities. Their model of inclusive banking had been adopted by financial institutions across the country. Sarah Jenkins now served as the bank's chairwoman of the board, her leadership extending far beyond that initial confrontation. Under her guidance, Prosperity National had established the largest minority business loan program in the state, with a 95% success rate. The waiting room where she'd once sat for hours had been renamed the Community Welcome Center, a symbol of the bank's commitment to equal service. Richard Thompson, still managing the flagship branch, had become a sought-after speaker on banking equity. His personal journey from prejudice to advocacy resonated with industry leaders struggling to address their own institutional biases. Success in banking, he often said, isn't about judging people at first glance, it's about giving everyone the opportunity to thrive. As Sarah walked through the bank's lobby one morning, she paused to watch the diverse mix of customers being served with equal respect and efficiency. The transformation went beyond mere policy changes. It represented a fundamental shift in how financial institutions could serve their communities. The greatest barrier to change. She reflected in her keynote speech at the National Banking Conference, isn't always overt prejudice. Sometimes it's the quiet assumptions we make about who belongs where, who deserves what. True transformation begins when we challenge those assumptions not just in others, but in ourselves. The story of that morning, when a respected neurosurgeon was made to wait because of unconscious bias, had become more than a cautionary tale. It was proof that positive change could grow from moments of confrontation, that dignity could triumph over discrimination, and that one person's stand for respect could transform an entire institution.